evening. I am u25449487, and I will be speaking on the importance of genetic modification in food security. The article that inspired me was South Africa Should Rethink Regulations on Genetic Modification Plants by James Lloyd, Dave Berger, and Privin Pillay. The article was published on a reputable website called The Conversation, which publishes news articles and academic articles. The article is relevant to my field of study because it concerns biochemistry and the concerns of genetic modification. The credibility of the source is measured by 5 factors. The currency, as the article was published in 2022. The relevance, it is highly relevant to chemical and biological advancements and its legal restrictions and ethics placed in South Africa. The authority behind the article being the Universities of Stellenbosch and Pretoria, as well as the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. The accuracy of the article, as the article is highly accurate and well informed, as well as finally the purpose of the article, which is to critique the South African regulatory approach on genetic modification. The main arguments of the article are the urgent need for modern crop improvement and South Africa's missteps. The key challenges to the world as well as South Africa is global food security, as there isn't enough food to feed the world's growing populations. This is supported by the yield gap, the difference between the amount of food needed to be produced and the amount of food actually produced. The next key point is South Africa's current regulatory approach. The approach is outdated and has incorrect classifications, which are too generalistic and are stifling technological development. Though the article does promise new technologies which could improve the precision and speed of crop development, as well as bring diverse benefits to both agriculture, business, and communities across South Africa, as well as an improved economic impact with more sustainable and predictable plant development. The next argument produced by the article is why South Africa's approach is problematic and the path forward. The consequences of South Africa's regulations have been inhibitions to innovation, which have prevented new technologies and new ideas being brought forth into the agricultural scientific community, as well as the limited access to technologies of gene development. The next idea would be the understanding of different technologies, comparing traditional genetic modification, transgenic, which is the passing of beneficial traits from parent plants to children plants, versus the more modern genome editing, which is editing the genetic material within the plant cells of a living plant. The proposed regulatory approaches fall into one of 3 categories. The first is a science-based regulatory approach, which would base the regulations on what is best for scientific development. Then there's the rational classification, which brings in the understanding of the different technologies into what the regulations would dividing plants with extra DNA inserted versus plants without extra DNA inserted. And finally, there's the global alignment form of regulation, where South Africa would mimic the laws in other countries which have produced new laws for genetically modified crops. I agree with the main points of the article, and to back up the points made in the article, South Africa should perform regulatory reform, the potential of genetic engineering. From other sources, claim scientific equality should be considered as a means and process of achieving equality for all. This can be seen as the regulation should allow for scientific investigation into genetic modifications of plants to achieve equality for all members of South Africa. Arguments based on scientific and human equality were used to stress that Africa is definitely a home for human genome editing, which means that South Africa has the ability and capability, as well as technology, to edit the genes of plants to improve equality. And finally, the responsible practice and guide by ethical considerations that might help to mitigate potential negative effects on biodiversity, social equality, and conventional agriculture. This means that as long as the scientists act responsibly, regulations should not be too restrictive. The broader scope and benefits of genetically modified crops relating to food security is the economics and innovative barriers. Genetically modified crops are the most important agricultural commodity that can improve the yield of South African smallholder farmers. This means that genetically modified crops would improve the food of small businesses and communities, as well as providing them with funds to support themselves. Farmers' incomes have increased as a large result of the adoption of these genetically modified crops, indicating that there are potential economic advantages, further proving my point that there are economic advantages to using genetically modified crops. Finally, GMOs, or genetically modified organisms, benefit mankind when used for purposes such as increasing the availability and quantity of food and medical care, and contributing to a cleaner environment. These are all positive outcomes which will better help South Africa. In conclusion, I believe that genetic modification needs to be better regulated in South Africa, with reform to the regulatory restrictions to better improve the scientific community. This will lead to better economic growth in the country, as well as more scientific discovery. The genetically modified crops will help with food security in the future. Finally, these are my references. Thank you.